Hello everyone, I'm Paige Samuels and I'm the marketing apprentice here at High Yield. So I'm just joining the webinar to just make sure it all runs smoothly. If you have any questions through the webinar, please feel free to add them to the Q&A box and we'll answer them at the end. I'll hand you over to Matt and Scott now.
Thanks, Paige, and thanks everyone for taking some time out of your lunchtime to join us. Hopefully, we've got some insightful thoughts for you to take away today. I'm Matt. I'm founder and CTO at High Yield. I've got very much kind of a technical lens on this, and I'll just pass you over to kind of Scott to do an intro as well.
Yeah, hi, I'm Scott Stonham. I'm founder of Digital Carbon Online, and I have 20-something years background in technology and innovation, and I've spent the last 6 or 7 of those really working at the intersection between sustainability and technology.
Great, thanks for joining us, Scott. So this is going to be quite an informal chat between myself and Scott. We've got some kind of key things that we wanted to cover. So we're going to do a bit of background into kind of how this, why we're in this situation that we're in. We've got kind of a more technical focus segment where we're going to go through kind of some of the real intricacies of why those technologies are causing such a high impact. And then hopefully some kind of quick takeaways at the end, some actionable things, because some of this stuff can feel quite big and like, how can I even get involved to make a change here? So we want to add some kind of actionable ones in there as well. And I think probably just to kick off, Scott, it'd be great for you to kind of give that background of how kind of technology is contributing to the current kind of climate problem that we have.
Yeah, sure. So I as I briefly mentioned there, I've been working in technology since 93, really. So in my early career, I was doing helping create technologies that we kind of take for granted today. So I was working at Vodafone building the mobile internet, building things like real-time train information systems, and then my next role is with a Californian company to help them create the market for GPS in smartphones. So been very much at the forefront of technology. But what I began to realize is that there was this kind of constant drive of technology for technology's sake, and actually that's kind of what moved me into this world of sustainability and technology, because I was realizing that we can't just keep doing all of this technology just because we can. So I started trying to find places where I could put my effort, my kind of talents and passion into things where technology was actually having a good impact, making lives better. And the good news is that despite what you hear in all the mainstream media and everywhere you look, all of the doom and the gloom that is around, and maybe we could talk about the impact of fear mongering in terms of motivation and actually having things change. There's actually a science behind that. But you see all of that. But actually, as I started looking into this with a different lens, I was really heartwarmed and really encouraged by how much good stuff was going on. And it's almost like I'd step from one world into another. And you start speaking with these people who are, I don't know, creating technologies that are able to monitor our soil so that they can really understand kind of how that soil is kind of working. Is it good soil? Is it bad soil? And if we make this kind of adjustment to the soil nutrients, how does that improve crop yield? How does that improve carbon absorption? All this stuff. You get into some really granular kind of technologies, and like this is actually having a really good impact. These are good things. There's so many things out there that are actually doing good. But I guess the problem that we have is, in my mind, when you look at technology at its kind of really fundamental sense, if you look all the way back to when humankind tamed fire as a technology through the agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, and all the other data revolutions and things that we've had subsequently, it's that drive for technology, like I saw in my early career, that's really kind of got us to the problem we're in right now. It's that drive that's driven up carbon emissions. It's our increasing amount of reliance on digital carbon that's increasing the number of tools we're using, and the amount of data that's just kind of orphaned and stored somewhere and taking up carbon. We can talk about that later, I guess, as well. So you've got that problem, but I'm having taken that step now. I'm even more optimistic that there's a really strong role for technology to play in making a better future. And in fact, kind of the way I think about this is my mission is for a more sustainable digital future. So everything we're trying to do today is to try and make that future not one where we turn back and say, well, if only we had changed this, if only we had acted sooner, we wouldn't be in this problem now, like we find ourselves now. So yeah, I think we've had lots of problems in the past, but there's so much opportunity to move forward now as well.
And what are some of those kind of positive initiatives that you're aware of that people can get involved in?
Yeah, there's there's so many, and it's so broad as well. When I look at my work, I'm looking at these things. I'm looking at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and if you look through that lens, there's technologies working in all of them. And I think what we'll probably end up focusing more on kind of the kind of digital side of stuff rather than social side. But I was at an event last week where it's called the Impact Awards, and there was a business there that was using technology to help solve the digital divide. Now, the digital divide is another consequence of our technological evolution. The more advanced we become with technology, those people who who can't keep up, or for some reason are instantly excluded from technology. Think refugees coming into the country where they've had to just leave everything behind and they have no technology to them now. These people are kind of completely isolated, and that digital divide is getting wider and deeper despite what we hear. So there's a company there using technology to help solve that problem. There's another company that's out there that's creating a technological solution to help protect the rights of gig workers and casual workers who can quite often get kind of taken advantage of, because one, they don't know what their rights really are, and two, it's quite easy to kind of and it's quite easy to do when there's no contracts really involved. So there's technologies everywhere you look, and there's the small things which are going to make a small impact at a great kind of scale. And then you have the big things, which are kind of like high budget, big investment, long lead times, but can have kind of a huge impact in their own right. So, picking out one fairly recent one, there's a new set of satellites that are in space called MethaneSat. And these are there to identify methane leaks and hold organizations and countries to account for the amount of methane that they're putting into the atmosphere. And obviously, if you don't know, methane is a much more dangerous greenhouse gas that's going into the environment compared to carbon dioxide. It has a much higher potency, although it's in the environment for less time. It's something that if we want to hit our targets, we have to really eliminate quickly. So that's a big one. And there's other big things like fusion. It doesn't really get bigger really than trying to develop atomic fusion, nuclear fusion. And there's a whole bunch of others in between, from detecting wildfires before they become fires. I mean, we saw just for the last couple of years how much devastation there is from wildfires. And the thing that is so problematic with wildfires is not only are you throwing all that carbon into the atmosphere, but you're also taking away one of the biggest kind of carbon sinks, the forests themselves. So it's a double whammy in that sense as well. I could talk about more, but I'll leave it there.
I was going to say, it's so interesting because these are all kind of really big initiatives, and I think from myself as well. So, kind of from my view on this and kind of the impact that I've seen, I guess I'm really focusing on what I've seen within terms of kind of the journey with high yield, and I don't look far beyond that bubble a lot of the time. So obviously, I think it was driven by the team at High Yield to be more sustainable in various different ways across our business, and one of those ways was kind of looking at kind of getting B Corp accreditation, but that also spilled over into kind of reviewing kind of how we being more sustainable for our clients in the products that we deliver. So my thinking is always kind of within the scope of those bubbles. So, but it's great to kind of have someone like yourself who's got the kind of the broader picture of other larger initiatives out there that can really make a difference. I mean, is there is there a way to get more involved in some of those bigger initiatives, or is it kind of yeah?
Yeah, no, there is, and I think the big things. Some of these are systemic, governmental, regional, national. Huge things that are going to take a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of patience and coordination to make happen. Then what we can get on to some of the smaller things. I know you mentioned at the top we're going to get to the point where we can have some tips and tricks and things you can take away. So I mean, we're not going to say, well, this is how you can get Fusion working tomorrow, but in between, there are ways of getting involved in some of these bigger projects as well. I like to think of these ideas of where we can build these incremental impacts into our business as usual. So as we're going along our business, every time something good happens or a milestone is achieved, we do something incrementally good. And there's various platforms out there to make that happen, to make that easy. I'll mention two. There's one called B1G1, which is called Buy One, Give One. I've been using that for several years now, and that allows me, for example, when someone books a meeting with me, I can sponsor provision of water to a family that needs it in another part of the world. I also use a platform called Patch, which allows me to sponsor carbon removal projects. So I've been sponsoring things like kelp farms. There's a technology that's being used to grow kelp farms and then to sink that kelp to the bottom of the ocean. So it captures it and stores it for thousands of years on the bottom of the ocean. So there's things like that that you can do to get involved in the bigger projects, and then there's lots of other things we could talk about, kind of in terms of those smaller. What can we do today and tomorrow? But maybe this is there's a couple of other points that would be good to bring it here as well. Sometimes within organizations and also within personal lives as well, there's that sense that these big things are the challenge is so big that I don't even know where to begin. That's one of those biggest hesitations. The other one then becomes this kind of feeling that that all of these big projects are going to happen anyway. I mean, a good one that people often talk about is well, aren't the energy networks going to become green anyway? So, well, yeah, but there will never be an infinite amount of green energy anyway. But yeah, these things that happen, but it doesn't mean that we should just sit back and wait for it. We should be doing something, because what we're faced with here is we're faced with a collective crisis, which means that we have to all change the way all of us have to change the way we do things and change our behavior and change the way we think. But with that said as well, all of these kind of, it's too big, I don't know where to start, it's kind of an existential threat, can lead to this phenomena you probably heard of before, either climate anxiety or eco-anxiety.
Definitely.
And when I was writing a report on this a couple of years ago, there was another report by a Stanford professor talking about the best way to help people through that feeling, that kind of I call it pit of despair, maybe, of it's just too big, I can't do anything about it, what's the point? It's to give people that possibility to do something. It doesn't really matter how small that thing is that they do, but they can do it. You can take that first step. But beyond that as well, it's to be part of a wider group, a community of people all doing small things. And it's kind of that, and taking that first step and then making more of those first steps and doing it as a community that can really help people either avoid or get out of that kind of pit of despair and that eco-anxiety, which is so important, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point, because I feel that's kind of that kind of sprite of interest was where kind of high yield really kind of adopted more of a sustainability focus, and it was, you can look at it in the grand scheme of things and think, actually, I could optimize my website so it's using less carbon. What's the point? In the grand scheme of things, it's going to be a tiny percentage of kind of reduction, when actually there's still massive polluters out there who don't appear to be doing much. And I think it's that kind of, that pit of despair that you kind of talk about. But even if you're making kind of, if we're making kind of a small change for ourselves at high yield, but also kind of our clients, then you get that network effect of people kind of going, oh, actually, yeah, we can make small changes here and there, and it might not be kind of with people's websites, it might be in other areas of their lives. Consuming less meat, anything that you can do is a small thing, but collectively builds up to have a higher impact, and reduce their impact at the same time.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right, and it's providing those different avenues for people to explore and to take those steps, because measuring, as you mentioned, measuring and reducing the carbon emissions of your website. You mentioned it could be minuscule, it could be small, it might not be, but it could be. But even that, you're absolutely right. It will stimulate people to think, well, I did that. Now, what else can I do? Now, what other change? It was easy. It wasn't too difficult, and I actually felt good about it, and I made an impact, and other people followed me. So what other small thing can I do in a different part of my life, as you said? But that kind of, it could be small, it might not be. I got a question for you here actually about your kind of client conversations as well. But in my conversations, there's a distinction between the businesses that have much more pressing issues to deal with. Those who have very complex, deep and polluting supply chains, those that are running huge fleets of vehicles, those that are maintaining very large campuses and things like that, think universities. You have those people, and then you have those businesses that have, if they weren't already kind of digitally native, they're becoming much more digitally dependent in their businesses now, and everything is moving towards digital. That's kind of how I see my conversations split. When you're talking to clients, prospects, other webinars like this, do you see a similar thing like that as well?
I think I see a lot of it. I guess we deal with probably quite a few kind of startup customers. So we're kind of working with a lot of founders in early stage, and I think a lot of the time they're starting from like ground zero, so they don't have kind of an infrastructure, they don't have a supply chain. They're kind of building a digital tool, product, or website, and I think certainly when you're in that startup mode, you've kind of got a couple choices, and we see this come out of our founders. There's those ones who are very kind of dead set on getting something to market, and it doesn't matter if they're gonna cut corners from a sustainability point of view, because they're very focused on their product and service. And then it's almost they've made decisions where they've got to the point of launching, and they haven't actually taken kind of some of those sustainability steps and reviewed what suppliers they go for, and are they going with a sustainably powered web host, those kind of things. And then there's the others who start thinking about those things from day one and bake those sustainability goals into their kind of product and service. And those are the ones that's really great. We can advise them and help work with them. And I feel like that's probably the conversations I have are more in those terms. And that's how the customers we generally deal with kind of tackle sustainability or not. And I think it's an education piece, and it's also an awareness for the two things don't need to be kind of mutually exclusive. You can be sustainable and it be good for business at the same time. So I think that's kind of our role in all of the conversations, to make sure that's brought out.
Yeah, and I think that's really a really powerful thing to realize. But first of all, there is absolutely, like you just said, the awareness in a lot of my conversations on digital carbon footprints. It's kind of followed a very similar path with different audiences, and that is, there's firstly that awareness. Digital isn't carbon free. Okay, first step, great. And then there's the kind of, well, how big an impact is it? So there's that kind of education around, well, actually, Zoom is potentially emitting much more carbon emissions than Google, because actually the technology behind it is different. The bytes that are being sent backwards and forwards are different. So there's that education of, okay, there's a choice. And I think at that point there's you're beginning to see data become available, awareness and data become available that informs a business decision in a way that couldn't have been done before. And that's often led to conversations of, well, how do we embed this into the organization? And I think a way of looking at this is that if you think of carbon in terms of budget senses, like we have finance as well. We already have the mechanisms in our organizations to track, measure, and allocate and be responsible for finance. We can use the same mechanisms for budget. We just need to know for carbon, so budgeting. We just need to know what our target is. And our target when it comes to digital carbon footprints is to start by measuring what it is that you have. And then that part of the conversation leads to, well, what can I start measuring? And it was that led me to build Digital Carbon Online, because there were so many different businesses doing different things with different pieces of technology that I thought that probably the most common point of entry to all of them is a website. So let's start there. Digital Carbon Online is part of a broader mission for me. But it's like, how do we help people start to measure something, to feel like they're doing, to make an impact, and then to actually build that into their business so they can actually create more of an impact going forward as well.
Completely. And I think that the measurement part is so key now. And I think it's also understanding like why there's a need for this, and like that, when you said that education piece, for kind of every click has an impact, there's a carbon emission. And I think especially now with web technologies kind of evolving, if we go back maybe 15 years ago, we had a lot of kind of monolithic systems. So systems that ran on one web server were quite kind of closed. Obviously, we didn't have the scale of users on the internet that we have now. And over the last 15 years, we've gone more to distributed systems. So that's systems where kind of you might have hundreds of servers that make up a web service rather than just one, all kind of individually powered, sometimes in one data center, sometimes across data centers. And I think it's really how technology has evolved, and obviously with AI and a huge amount of kind of compute needed for that from a kind of a graphics processing point of view. There's so much more demand on kind of energy within kind of technology now, but that's why this really is so much of a problem. And what we think are small changes can actually add up to be quite, like you say, big changes when you actually consider them, and when you can actually measure the impact of what you're doing. And I think there's a few that we kind of think about when we're kind of launching a new website or service, certainly around just the amount of data, really. So I think the biggest fundamental one is kind of the amount of data that comes over the wire, which obviously not everyone in our audience today is probably completely technical, so we're going to keep reasonably high level. But essentially the amount of data, when you make a request as a user to a website, that request is going off over the network. It's going to be a network that's going to be connecting you to a data center that's obviously hundreds and hundreds of miles away. And that data center will kind of build that request for the page, and it will send it back down the wire to your computer. And it's the amount of information that comes back down that wire that can have a kind of dramatic impact on the amount of carbon emissions. So I think when we're thinking about websites and web platforms, it's always about making that as minimal as possible. So making sure page size is small, images are optimized, using kind of good web technologies for images like ImageP. And I think it's some of those kind of principles that you can take across to building websites and web platforms, but really do have an impact. And I think from your point of view, from obviously Digital Carbon Online and measuring that, what do you kind of see as kind of those biggest areas that from the measurements do have an impact?
So media type is a big one. So the kind of media that's being embedded into the pages, that's probably the biggest one that is most obvious as well. So whether it's the wrong kind of image type for the purpose, so you can get, if you're some images you can use different formats for, and again trying to keep it as high level as we can, you can use different formats to achieve the same kind of visual effect. Some of them can be much lighter weight in terms of how much data is being transmitted, but still give the same kind of visual effect. But at the moment, many of the tools that are around to kind of build websites and manage websites are not necessarily the best at helping you choose the right kind of format for lowering the byte, the number of bytes. So I think that's one. And then often, there's this need to embed high quality videos into pages as well, because it delivers a better user experience. Well, that's what it's intended to do. So these kind of pushing of really dense byte kind of data types down into phones, maybe, which can't even render it at the kind of quality that you're hoping they would. It's those kind of things, those really high density things that are kind of the most obvious. But there are other things as well, like I've seen websites that are loading huge font files when they never even use the font. So it's like somehow that font was kind of was loaded in there historically, but it's never been taken out. And I think that's another point that I heard on a webinar the other day. It's a really good mindset to have, is you should go into this mindset that whenever you build something new, you should take something old away. Because I think with digital, it's so easy for us to kind of just fire and forget, as it were, just kind of create it, leave it, and kind of evolve from there. But we should really be getting into that habit of, I'm going to put something new out there, I'm going to take something old away that I don't need. In that instance, that would have been that. It's like built a new page, changed all the fonts, should take the old fonts out. So there's lots of things. The other things, everybody's very happy. Well, everybody, so many generalizations in that one sentence. Everybody's very happy to throw Google Analytics in. But that has its own impact as well. Do you really need all of that stuff that you're probably never going to figure out how to use it? Or can you go for a lighter weight kind of analytics engine that just tells you what you need to know? So there's those kind of things. But getting into that technical level, I'm sure you've got so many more things that you can show.
Yeah, and I think obviously I'm conscious of time, and we're gonna want to leave some time for the next probably kind of 10 minutes or 10-15 minutes to do some questions and answers. But I think I think there you kind of, even in those sentences, summed up what could potentially be small and actionable things. So we went off obviously at the start of this with some bigger initiatives that felt like it's quite hard to kind of get involved with, all the way down to hopefully at the end here some smaller things that can definitely help. And I think what you've said there on the Google Analytics, for example, and the fact that you need to kind of, as you're adding something, you should be taking something away, really resonates. So one of the things that we've noticed quite a lot is Google Tag Manager, which is used probably on the vast majority of websites to manage people's analytics, or other third-party services such as Hotjar that people use for kind of tracking on websites. People don't maintain their Google tags in Tag Manager, so actually half the time that Tag Manager piece of code is bringing down a lot of unused JavaScript to the page for tracking services that aren't even used anymore. So it's kind of keeping on top of that maintenance and checking. And I think anything you can do to kind of page speed and optimization, again, actually does have, you're doing it for the right reasons in terms of reducing that carbon emissions, but also that it does actually provide you, there's kind of a really nice kind of linkage between that and actual search engine optimization. So how Google kind of ranks pages, and a big metric for Google's algorithm in terms of rankings is page speed. And obviously the less amount of data, the better your page speed score is going to be. And there's certainly a lot of more technical kind of technical practices that you can do in terms of SEO that has a positive impact on kind of your carbon footprint, but also vice versa. So I think it's really a nice thing to take away, that it's good for the planet, but it's also going to be better for your business. And also there's some things that aren't even technical, such as kind of user experience. So making sure that when people go to your website, they're actually in a journey that's tailored to them, and they're not going off clicking, trying to find stuff, spending more time on your website than they need to. Actually, they're on a kind of controlled user experience where they're getting exactly what they need really fast. And that's a good experience for them, but it's also going to be kind of producing less carbon at the same time. So I think just small kind of takeaways like that. I think, like you said, measuring is a really great one. Obviously, to measure, initially is going to be so important, because you need to have that baseline to know if you're taking something out or putting something in, what impact does that have. The thing I really like about Digital Carbon Online, actually, so the platform that you've developed, is that it does the tracking across all of your pages, and it does it over time. So you might have a page that's actually quite small in terms of its carbon emissions, but it could be your highest visited page on the whole site. So actually you need to spend more time on that page rather than your one page, which is like really bloated, has terrible carbon emissions, but only gets one visit a month. So you can really kind of allocate your time in the best place.
Yeah, I thank you for saying that, because I can share a real use case of that with another client. They found that by looking at over time which page was generating the most carbon, something changed rapidly overnight, and it was because somewhere on the interweb, somebody had put a link on a very high kind of trafficked index page thing to one of their old legacy product pages. Now, they'd forgotten this legacy product page was there, and it was a really badly optimized page with loads of heavy images, and it was selling product that they no longer even sold. But they were getting a spike in traffic there. It was generating a huge amount of carbon emissions, and they went, well, what do we do? The simple answer in that one was, well, you get rid of the page, or you update the page to have the right product and the right kind of information in there. So they did that, and overnight, they were able to see this carbon emissions go down. But actually now, because they had the right product, the right information in there, and it's actually the wrong brand to start with as well. Now they had that as well. It meant that they were delivering a better user experience, which is actually not damaging their brand potentially as much as they were before. So again, yeah, it was only because they saw a spike and they were like, what does this mean?
Yeah.
And they went in to have a look at it.
No, totally. And I think that's so important. I think it's that measurement piece, but it's also kind of those actionable things on how you can improve. And again, they don't always have to be time consuming or budget consuming. They, can be some small changes that really don't add up. And at the moment, High Yield is currently running a How Green is Your Website free audit. We're using kind of Scott's tool to do kind of the carbon tracking on that. So if there's anyone on this webinar but wants to get involved in that, then kind of do reach out. I think we're going to be sending details out to everyone after. Paige, did you want to go through any kind of questions that have popped up from the audience?
Yeah. So one of the questions I've got here is, how do I know if my website is bad for the environment?
That's probably a good one for you, Scott, I guess, in terms of tracking and visibility.
Yeah, how do you know? It is. It is, because the only way to get a zero carbon website is to not have one. But that's not necessarily good for business. It's definitely not good for the people on this call. But the point is there that every website, whether you're running on a green on a host that is running on green energy, even if you're running on a green energy host, your website will be generating emissions. It will be having an impact through both the embodied and the operational carbon emissions. It will be having an impact. So it's not easy having an impact on the environment. It's how much is that impact. And I think, yeah, as you mentioned just now, Matt, you're running a green audit service, so you can definitely go and try that out, or you can come over to my website directly. But yeah, go and speak to Matt and the team.
Yeah, and I think again, part of that, like as Scott said, the kind of the web host. As long there's so many different web hosts out there that actually you want to be you can't zero that emission, but you can reduce it. And starting with a web host that has their data centers powered from renewable energy is a good place to start. And there's the kind of the greenweb.org directory that you can go to look at a high level. I know for a fact that kind of AWS, most of their Europe regions and certainly their London region is 100% powered by renewable energy. I think Google Cloud, the last time I checked, the London data center region was 85% powered from renewable energy. So I think that's a really good starting place, having that kind of sustainable web host.
Another one that we've had come in is, how much can you reduce the emissions of my website by?
It's a good one. I think again, it really depends. So you could strip everything back to a completely minimal website and you probably could reduce your emissions quite a lot. But as Scott said, you'd never reduce them down to zero because it's still making requests to a server that's sitting in a data center somewhere powered by energy, and there's also all the network infrastructure in between. So I feel like you can reduce them as much as you feel is gonna you as much as you can while still retaining kind of a user experience that's gonna be valuable to your business and your customers. So I think it's a balancing act really, and there's not a definitive answer to it. It's really based on the kind of the context of the situation.
I can give you some numbers, but it's just a single use case, because I don't want to give numbers about some of the people on Digital Carbon Online, but I can tell you about one of my websites. So I've got the stats in front of me. In February 23, I noticed something was going on with my carbon emissions. They were creeping up and up and up. And then I investigated a few things, and I found that I had a whole bunch of resources kind of loaded in, because I was running it on WordPress. So loaded a whole bunch of resources I didn't need, had plugins I wasn't using any longer, and I hadn't enabled image optimization to automatically optimize JPEG and PNGs into WebP images. So by doing those small things, relatively small, I went from a peak in February of generating over 6 kilograms of carbon emission from one website in 1 month, down to August 23, where it was down to just over 1 kilogram. So for the same website in that period of time, I'd reduced it by 5 kilograms a month.
Yeah, and that's just some of the smaller things that we were talking about earlier in terms of kind of trimming unnecessary plugins and optimizing images. So definitely that's a real positive impact. Is there any more, Paige?
Yeah, we've got quite a few coming in. I'll go through and I'll select some of the sort of ones that I think would be easier for us to answer. So typically, what does good look like in terms of a reduction in carbon, like as a percentage? What should you also look to offset your carbon to help minimize the impact?
I might take the first part of that, Scott, and then I think you've probably got some good options for the offsetting. In terms of a good percentage, I think it's almost relative in terms of where the low-hanging fruit is to start with. So as Scott said, he saw quite a dramatic improvement in terms of decreased emissions, and that was from the fact that there was kind of unneeded plugins and images weren't optimized. So that could be achieved just by kind of sorting those things out. You could, and that was obviously starting from quite an easy base. You can also kind of optimize user journeys, optimize kind of page flows, and that could have again another incremental impact on that and bring that even lower. So I think in a lot of terms, if it's a website that's not even been looked at for its carbon emissions, and if it's not been optimized for SEO in any way, then you could see kind of 70-80% reductions just by doing some of the basic things. And then for offsetting, Scott.
Yeah, so offsetting, the practice has come under quite a bit of scrutiny recently, and I think when we're talking about offsetting, we need to understand that offsetting is not the answer. Our first and kind of highest priority must be to reduce before we offset. But like I said earlier, we can't have a zero carbon website without not having one. So there will always be some kind of carbon, and it's that kind of residual carbon that we should be looking to offset, or as I like to call it, remove, because actually built into Digital Carbon Online, there is an optional feature to help you remove that residual carbon on a monthly or kind of biannual basis. And why I want to call it remove is because the projects that I choose to support through there are through that platform I mentioned earlier on, Patch. And they're all projects that have that have been designed in a way that they're going to achieve their carbon removal targets or their sequestration targets within a short period of time, 1 to 2 years typically. I mean, if you go and you plant trees, that's great. I mean, that's how I started my journey on this as well. I was working through a platform called Digital Humani. There's so many others out there that you can use to plant trees for a decent cost. But the problem with that is that it can take 20 to 40 years for you to achieve the kind of carbon removal that you want through that. And that's if the tree survives, it doesn't get cut down or doesn't get burnt. So for me, it's really important on finding those projects that have that near term. So some of those near-term projects that I'm working on, there's one I mentioned already, kelp farming. That's done by a company called Running Tide. And then there's soil amendment. So that's by kind of sprinkling over, I think it's ball salt into agricultural lands, and that absorbs a huge amount of carbon from the air. And that's a 2-year carbon absorption window. There's some concrete solutions as well that are using carbon to strengthen concrete. Using one there, and oh yeah, and then I'm also working with a carbon capture and storage company that's doing small scale carbon capture and storage that goes into places where they already have the heated gas. Because when it comes to DAC, direct air capture and things like that, one of the biggest reasons then they've got so much pushback is they require a lot of energy to heat the air and to make it work. But this one I've chosen to work with, they already are working in an area. Imagine kind of the exhaust pipes of data center kind of cooling fans. The energy, the heat has already been the energy's already been put in to heat the air up, so it's much more efficient. So they're just a few, but if you have a look at Patch, there's a whole bunch on there that you can have a look at. It's patch.io, and there's many others like that too.
Yeah, so there's still let's see a few more. So how often should you be auditing your website?
That's a really good one. And I think as frequent as you can sustainably do it, to be honest with you. So I don't think I think most people should kind of be looking to do this on a monthly basis. Again, I think tracking is the main kind of metric for change. So if you've got a platform like Digital Carbon Online, you're going to be getting real-time reports, daily numbers. So it feels like you could check in on that once a month, do some tweaks, check your plugins, check if any images have been added to your CMS that haven't been optimized. And you could take it even more seriously and do it on a weekly basis if you want. But I think it's really just about being, a cadence for sustainable for your business.
Yeah, I'd just add, I think it needs whatever cadence you choose, it needs to become a habit. Don't just do it once and forget about it and do it 6 months later and then 9 months and whenever it feels like it. And that's again kind of why Digital Carbon Online is built the way it is. So it's constantly sitting there doing it for you. So when you come into that, whatever cadence it is, monthly, 2-3 monthly, whenever it is, the data's there and you can see the decisions. You can see the data to help you make the decisions.
Yeah, and it could be tied with SEO again, because the two things are so linked that whenever you're tackling things from an SEO point of view on a monthly basis, many of those things are going to contribute positively to reducing carbon emissions. I think probably Paige, we've got time for one more, maybe.
Well, there's a couple more. There's just 2 more questions left, so maybe if
Great,
we can try and fit them both in. So what about things like CDN provides like Cloudflare? How would you uncover the impact of services like this for a business?
So again, I think you've got the measurement tools for doing that, but having a service like Cloudflare is going to have a really good impact. So Cloudflare works in a number of ways to reduce the amount of traffic, but also the amount of steps that traffic's got to take across a network. So CDNs generally will work based on a geographic location. So when you're making a request, it will serve data from a server that's closer to you. So that's one benefit. So that's going to benefit page speed, but it's all going to also benefit the amount of trips that network request has got to go through, because it may not even go back to the origin server, but maybe in a data center a long way away. It may retrieve a cached version of it from Cloudflare CDN. So in general, CDNs, the usage of CDN is a good thing in terms of kind of user experience, website performance, but also kind of reducing carbon emissions.
Yeah, and then finally, can you provide an insight into the first steps on how high yield measures and reduces a website's digital carbon footprint?
So I think probably the first thing we do is kind of that tracking piece, that measuring. So you need to have that baseline. So getting a tool such as Digital Carbon Online, getting that base metric, and then it's really going in, it's inspecting the network request. So what's coming back over the internet from a request, you know, how many you can, it's probably getting a bit too technical, but within a lot of web browsers, there's an inspector or a developer mode. You can actually go in there. You can look at the page. You can go to a network tab, and it will show you every single request that's come back over the network, and you can actually order it by size. So you can see quite quickly, oh, I've got a 10 megabyte image on my homepage. That's really not good. So that's the kind of the steps at a very technical level we take, and we kind of move through a list of kind of priorities that we make in terms of how we optimize websites, and make sure at each step whether the website is kind of passing based on those, and then offer kind of ways to remediate against areas where there can be improved optimization.